Hi, this is Winston, and today we're going to show you how we built our raised beds in an affordable but yet durable, simple to build. But most important, we're going to focus on how we built what we call an integrated pest control. And that includes some nets for insects and some chicken wires for rabbits. So if you have the same need, just stay tuned and we'll cover all of that. This is the video number 4 in a series of 6 videos we are doing to share with you our own experience and the process we have been going through to create a backyard vegetable garden from scratch. The first video we covered site selection, the second one we covered what to grow, then we had a very detailed step-by-step on garden layout. Today, as I mentioned, we're going to cover the way we built our beds, and then we're going to cover soil preparation, and finally we're going to cover the planting process. If you missed the first 3, we're going to leave a link here down below so you can watch those as well. And remember, subscribe to our channel if you want to have real-time alerts on next videos that we're going to publish. The fact is, there are tons of videos out there on how to build raised beds, and I don't think there's right or wrong. It really depends on your needs. In our case, likely we're going to be in this house for another year, so we took that in consideration as well. And as I mentioned at the beginning, our focus was to have this affordable, simple to build, but yet durable. And again, in a way we could integrate our pest control system. So materials we used were really dimensional lumber. We went with 2x6x8. You could think it's not tall enough, but we're going to show how we prepare the soil underneath to ensure that we would have enough soil to plant what we want to plant. So we're going to cover that in our next video. You could go with 2x8 or 2x10 or 2x12, but remember, the taller is the bed, of course, more soil you're going to need. Yeah. So again, we went with dimensional lumber. We had some wood screws and glue, and we also had some very inexpensive L-shaped brackets that we attached to each of the corners. So we got some dimensional lumber, and to be efficient with the usage of the wood, the first step was to cut 4 of the boards in half, so we could use those as the short ends for our 4 beds. Then for each of the corners, we pre-drilled some of the holes to avoid the wood to split. And then we also ensured that the short ends were inside. And the reason is we are using a 4-foot wide garden template for our planting process, which again, we're going to cover in our last video. And in order to do that, we made sure that the inside of the bed was exactly 4 foot wide. Then we attached each of the corners with wood glue and 2 screws. So the last step was to add these L-shaped brackets in each of the corners of the bed, just to provide some additional, robustness. We are in Michigan. We have a wet winter, a wet spring, and the freeze and thaw cycle could warp the beds. So we wanted to add some additional structure. It's worth it. It's a very inexpensive piece of hardware. So this is how the bed looks like. We were pretty happy with the result. It was simple to build. It was affordable, and it is durable. And at the end of the video, we're actually, after we built the pest control, we're just going to give you a rough idea on if we were to buy all of these materials, which we didn't because we had a lot of leftover material, but roughly how much would the 4 beds cost. But for now, we are going to cover the way we integrated pest control for insects and for rabbits.
Switching back to the host that you're used to seeing on these videos, the less attractive of the two, I am going to walk through how we did insect control. And what we're trying to protect here is brassicas. So we grow a lot of plants in the cabbage family in our case, multiple kinds of kale and different kinds of broccoli, specifically rapini and those kinds of things. These all attract cabbage moths. And one option, as I mentioned in the last video on laying out the garden, if you don't grow that many of them, is to just disperse them around so they don't become an attractive target. I grow so many that that's not going to work. They're like 70% of the plants, and so they're going to attract these moths pretty much no matter what. So what I do instead is the opposite. I pull them all together into large blocks and I cover them with row cover, aka insect netting, in order to prevent the moths from getting to them at all. And we support this insect netting with 1/2-inch PVC. It's easy to get. We had a bunch in the garage and it's inexpensive. So we took these lengths of PVC and we bent them into a hoop shape and secured the ends on some rebar that we also had in the garage. And we just left it like that for about 3 days until they held an arch shape. We then took those arches and we wanted to do as simple of an approach as possible initially. So we just pushed those arches straight into the ground. We have a lot of clay, so once they get down, they're anchored pretty well. And we draped the insect netting on top. Now, insect netting is called floating row cover for a reason. It's really, really lightweight. It floats around. And so in order to secure it, there are these 1/2-inch PVC clamps. So they're designed specifically to work with this PVC. And normally you use them to anchor this onto the arches, and we did use them for that. But we also did something a little unconventional, which is we took an extra length of scrap PVC and we screwed it down onto the long edge of our wooden raised bed as well as the 2 short sides. And that allowed us to then take the edges of the row cover, lay it on top of that length of PVC, and also use the same clamps to snap it down and hold it in place there as well. And we really liked that solution for those 3 edges of the bed. If you remember from the last video, I hold this about 9 inches back from the other edge of the bed because I'm going to plant some summer crops there that grow up and over a trellis. And so that meant I couldn't snap it to that bed. And instead, I took another scrap length of PVC and just kind of rolled up that long edge on the PVC, put it in place, and then I just took a couple of landscape staples and went down to, through the row cover, but also through our bed cover that we have with paper mulch. And between those 2 and the soil, it really just holds it nicely in place without a whole lot of effort. So when I want to check on the crops, I could simply lift off those clamps, lift up those staples and unroll it, and I could easily get into the contents of the bed underneath the insect netting. We were pretty happy with that first version of the bed. I will say one of the additional advantages of row cover, and the reason that I keep it around and I've used it for a few years, it also provides some thermal protection from cold temperature. And case in point, after we had these up, we had the plants put in and the netting over them, we had snow. So we had one day where it snowed most of the day. That's not really that unusual for Michigan spring. It can be cold and wet for a long time. And what that meant for us on our pretty basic structure that we had under there, it did hold up. That's the good news. But the weight of the snow caused a saddle shape and weighed down this insect netting. It didn't collapse, which is good. But it did mean that that snow stayed on top, and that means you're not getting any light. So the snow is really blocking everything underneath, and we didn't want that to keep happening. So we made some structural modifications. We took those arches, we pulled them out of the ground, and we put 6 pieces of rebar where the bottoms of the arches were going to be. We also cut the arches in half, and we added at the ends of the bed 2 T-shaped connectors, and in the middle a cross or plus-shaped connector. That allowed us to connect all 3 arches with ridges. And so we added 2 straight sections of PVC as a ridge beam, connecting all 3 of these arches that were then anchored into the ground with the rebar. That meant a few things. First, they were all integrated into one total holistic structure, which made the whole thing a lot stronger. Second, it gave me another kind of new place to clamp that insect netting. I could just clamp it twice on top of the ridge instead of on every single arch. And then third, when we do have snow now or as we go into the late fall, when I will be growing the same crops again, like kale and brassicas, and I'll be covering them again, if we start getting snow in the late fall, it will, or any more this spring, it will shut off of the top and we won't get that snow accumulation and the plants will get much more light. So we were a lot happier with that structural modification. And then our final modification was how we're using those clamps on the edges of the bed. The good news about these clamps is they hold the row cover on to the PVC really, really tightly. The bad news is that they hold it on really, really tightly. And so especially on a cold spring morning, it's really awkward and kind of hard to get in there and pry off these clamps with frozen fingers. I also was noticing that it was causing a lot of wear and tear on the edge of the netting as I was pulling them on and off. And so flipped it a little bit, and instead we removed the lengths of PVC and we took the clamps themselves, flipped them over, pre-drilled some pilot holes, and then screwed the clamps onto the wood. And what that meant is we could then take a longer section of PVC, similar to how I do the edge that's close to the trellis. We roll it up over the PVC, and then we just snap that length of PVC with the netting rolled around it into these clamps. And the reason I like that a lot better, two reasons. One, the entire edge is secured because it's all rolled around this PVC with just a couple clamps. There's no little areas where it's going to lift up and let moths underneath. The other reason I really liked it was that it's much easier to get off. So I can now take my hands in the middle, so it's sort of the midpoint between where the clamps are. There's a little give in that pipe, and I can just reach under and pop the whole pipe straight up. And that makes it a lot easier to take it in and out, which means that we're not also going to get as much wear and tear on the edge of the insect netting. So I talked about how we made the insect netting a more structurally secure cover. In the case of our next topic, which is rabbit protection, that really wasn't a concern. And the reason is we just used chicken wire physically held up off the bed a little bit to keep the rabbits out of it. And the snow, if we have one, will just go right through that chicken wire. Wind is the same. So while we had a lot of structural considerations on the insect netting, you'll see that we didn't have nearly as many concerns when it came to the rabbit protection.
In our last video, we're going to show you the planting process, but for today, you just need to take my word that we have a lot of salad greens on that space, and they started to germinate. And of course, we found then that we have rabbits, and we have a lot of them. So we knew that we needed to build something to protect the salad greens from the rabbits. So we had some leftover chicken wire, and the materials we used are really 1/2 inch PVC. We have 6 elbows, again PVC, and some wood screw and the chicken wire. The first step was to use some scrap PVC parts and cut them to the height that we would like the chicken wire to be. We then attached the elbows to the PVC, and we're going to have one in each corner as well as 2 of them in the middle of the bed. As Rachel mentioned, we don't need too much structure here, so we just added those to the soil without any rebar. And then we attached 3 pieces of PVC to create the horizontal structure for those. We then cut the chicken wire, and for those of you who have worked with chicken wire already, you know that it hurts your hands, especially at the end of the cut. So what we did was, again, using some scrap PVC parts, we created a handle, and then the next step was to land this on top of each side of the beds. Again, those handles were pretty handy at the end, and we had 0 cuts in our hands. We then attached some screws on the top of the PVC as well as on the side of the beds, so we could stretch the wire, especially the sides. The sides we cut in small parts of chicken wire, and then we just attached to the beds and to the screw that was on top of the PVC, because those parts, the side parts are not, they don't need to be removed. So we ensured that those were well attached. So this is our end result. At the end, we were happy with this, what I would call prototype. Of course, we have already several different ideas on how to make it better, but it does work for what we need for now. Again, it was leveraging some of the materials we had in hand. It was simple to build and, again, affordable, so everything under those principles. And it's going to do the work that we need for now, which is to keep the rabbits away. So this process gave us 4 4x8 beds, 2 of them with nets for insects and 1 of them with chicken wire for the rabbits. As I mentioned at the beginning, we have mostly used materials that we had available, but if we were to buy everything, we would have spent roughly $150 or $37, $38 per bed. So we were pretty happy with the result. It was simple to build. It was affordable, and gave us the pest control that we were looking for. How do you manage pest control in your vegetable garden? We would love to hear your comments, so leave those below. And remember to subscribe if you want to get real-time alerts on the next videos. This is the video number 4, as I mentioned, as we share our experience and the process we have been going through to create a backyard vegetable garden from scratch. Next time, which should be in a couple of days, we're going to share with you how we had our soil prepared and as well as the planting process. So as always, we hope it was helpful, and happy growing. See you next time.